How's it going, everybody? I wanted to make a video because I haven't made a nerd video in like 5 months because I've been in Vietnam for the past 5 months. Didn't really have the stuff to and the atmosphere to make videos in Vietnam, but wanted to knock one out because I have been watching a lot of D&D videos, YouTube from Vietnam. And one of the things I've noticed a lot of people bitching about just about everything about D&D, RPGs, right? And I've noticed that there's a distinct difference between younger gamers and older gamers, and a lot of the issues kind of arise, from just sort of maybe the generational gap in role players, right? So I was going to make a video. I thought an easy video is just to talk about some of the differences between younger and older players, how we approach the game. I mean, I guess I count myself as an older player, in that I started playing in the 80s when I was like still in middle school, maybe even earlier. But one of the things I've noticed, there's a lot of things, but one of the things I've noticed is older players seem to be less interested, we'll say, in optimization of their characters. Like, you don't see a lot of us old players looking up what the optimal builds are for, whatever the class is and whatever system, right? We tend to just grab whatever, and when somebody brings, if it's Pathfinder, there's a lot of stuff already in there, and nobody really explores beyond the player's handbook, right? Whereas even when I was younger, we would look at all the arcana, for second edition and third edition, find all those weird prestige classes and try to build it in. As we got older, we just didn't care about that stuff anymore. And so when you see, there's a lot of videos about optimization, and I never watched them. Like, there's a lot of videos of, this is what you do to get the best out of your cleric or whatever, and I don't care about that stuff. And I notice almost always it's the younger video influencers that make those kind of videos, right? And I guess and they make them because they're popular and people look at it. But older players tend not to do that. Older players tend to sort of enjoy just as much a suboptimal character. Sometimes that's more fun, and that's because older players tend to enjoy the role-playing aspect a little more than younger players. It's not that we don't enjoy combat and tactics and that good stuff, but the role playing and just the kind of interaction is what makes it fun, right? Like, you don't even need to have combat in a session to still enjoy yourself. So that's one of the major differences. Another difference is younger players tend to complain, when they get tired of a system, or they complain about a system, say 5e or Pathfinder or Pathfinder 2 or whatever. They'll make these big rants about how this is broken because maybe everybody who builds a ranger always does the same thing and it's the same sort of actions, or there's mechanics that they don't like. It tends to be mechanical complaints that they have about the game. And I've noticed that older players, we don't bitch about that. It's something that it doesn't, they have the same thoughts, about broken mechanics, but older players in their games, and especially older game masters, just kind of ignore rules that they don't like, right? And it's just automatic, so they don't bitch about it, because they're much more accustomed to sort of Frankensteining things in and having homebrewed rules, right? So that when they encounter something they don't like, they just ignore it, right? Whereas younger players tend to feel like if the rules say you do this, you have to do this, and if it makes your experience enjoyable, well, it's the fault of the game, instead of just ignoring that and moving on, right? Another difference, which kind of leads into the third difference, is that older players tend to enjoy a less rigid system, in that, like, when we started playing, it was what they call theater of the mind, right? You would just describe what was happening, and there was no miniatures. There was like, if you were lucky, there was a piece of paper where somebody was writing out, like, here's a little circle where you are, and here's where this, and maybe this is the shape of the cave, and you're like, here. Sometimes we just move dice around on the table, right? And it wasn't very tactile. It was a lot of just imagining what was going on. There certainly wasn't like you move 30 feet exactly, right? It was just like, well, yeah, I move over there, and it'd be like, yeah, that's you can move there. That's about fine. Can I move over here? Yeah, that's fine, right? So it was less rigid in those kind of terms, and we all kind of grew up playing that way, so that when we play some of the newer systems that are just die hard, everybody, you can only move this many exact feet, and if it's 5 feet further. Well, you just didn't get there, and then your turn is wasted or something. Whereas before we would just be like, yeah, you make it, or no, you don't. That's too far away, right? And you could, and what this kind of lends is that older players are very much more used to describing what they're doing, right? They would be like, well, I run up this cliff and jump off it and land on that guy and hit him, whereas there's no mechanic for that for the newer, younger generation, so they just don't do it, right? It just doesn't occur to them. So, you know, not to say that older players are more imaginative, but that's the way that we kind of approach the game, because that's the way we used to play it when we were young, right? Is that it was a very kind of open-ended, you know, theater of the mind is what they call it, right? Is that you kind of imagine what you do and you just describe it and then you do it, right? And there wasn't necessarily rules for everything, mechanics, so it was less structured in that sense, right? Less rigid. That's a, you know, kind of a big thing. Next was it the third. Another thing, and this is kind of a big one I've noticed, just examining the different contents from various, let's say, YouTube personalities in the TTRPG world, is that everybody has opinions on how you're supposed to play the game. And I've noticed that older players, there's this sentiment that I kind of empathize with. Like, I get it, that, you know, we've been playing the game for so long, and you have this new generation that just discovered Dungeons and Dragons because of 5th edition, and now they're telling us how to play the game, right? They're giving advice on how to play the game, and a lot of older players just like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, right? Like, that's all of that's not like, we're not impressed with your advice or your opinions, and, you know, they disagree. So you have a lot of older grognards, right? Just kind of bitching about why you shouldn't do that, right? And in fairness, you know, for, you know, just describe how it's like, I've been playing for 30 years. And so for somebody who's been playing for 6-7 years, like, I discovered D&D in like 2018 or something, you know, maybe, you know, 2013 or whatever, you know, and this is how you should do it. I have all these opinions on it. And we're like, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And by and large, you know, I have seen some videos where, you know, the older players will say that a lot of the popular D&D content creators, the TTRPG content creators, they post weekly videos, and a lot of that stuff they talk about, you can tell that, you know, they don't really know what they're talking about. They're just making content, but they're very popular, and they're not necessarily the best, most talented game masters to follow, right? Their advice is not always all that good, right? And there's also the sort of, you know, generational gap in, you know, like when you see, like, there was an issue a while back, so maybe I'll talk about it later, around one of the popular content creators, the idea of what is called a safety rule, right? And that you should, I don't understand it completely, so I don't want to talk about it too much without getting a full grasp on it, but more or less, like, you should have warnings or things that you agree that you won't include in your game or something, lest someone be offended in some way, right? And those things, you know, for our generation are totally alien, right? Like, we would never, as a person, ask the rest of the group to, you know, I don't know, don't include dogs because I was bitten by a dog when I was a kid or something. Like, it would just never occur to us to impose on the rest of the group, right? It would just be super socially awkward to do that. And, you know, personally, I mean, also, like, our groups, you know, tended to be people we knew, and, you know, you would kind of feel each other out, like, oh, you're a nerd, right? Oh, do you play D&D? And then we would get, you know, get a little group, and those groups would be pretty cohesive and pretty tight, right? There wasn't a lot, except for some of the people that would go to, like, cons. I mean, there wasn't a lot of constantly going into new groups, right? But if I were ever to show up to a group and they're like, here's the safety rules, I would just kind of bail. I'm good, man. I don't think I want to play with you guys. It's just going to be weird, right? It's going to be it's a turn off, right, for us older players, sort of immediately. So that's why you see a lot of them just kind of bitching. I mean, they kind of have to understand that you're a whole younger generation that wasn't raised the way we were, right? For us, like, Gen X types. And so for them, you know, for all I know, maybe it is something you need to do for younger players. I don't know, but like I personally, it does not appeal to me at all, right? And so there's that cultural difference. We don't approach the game the same way, and older players tend not to be. They don't want to hear what your thoughts on how to play the game, right? We've been playing it for 30 years, right? We just don't care about you. Like your opinions are, I don't say but younger players, your opinions are often nonsensical, right? And lastly, um, one of the sort of major big differences of why you see so much, if you look at the OSR, it's almost what they call the old school revival. It's almost all older players, right? Like, I'd be surprised. Like, I'd say 80 to 90% are over the age of 35 at least, right? If not more. And what it is that, like, since we've been around, like, I played original Dungeons and Dragons like mostly at home with another kid in my neighborhood when we were in like, actually it was like 5th grade, right? And then when AD&D came out is when I really started playing in like middle school with a little group of kids. And when we started playing, right, we got used to this edition. 2nd edition for me was the one I probably grew up on more or less, right? And played that through college, into the early 2000s, right? And I was kind of slow to adopt 3rd edition. I didn't really want to change. But once we did start playing it, I actually came around on it. I was like, I like this. This is better. It's at least easier to play, or at least the rules are more rational, right? The D20 system, right? And then from that point on, we could have still played 2nd edition. Right? I would have been fine with that, right? I said actually the group wanted to play 3rd edition. I was like, okay, whatever. But now we've come to realize now in like my mid 40s is that you don't actually have to change systems, right? You can stick with we could still be playing Dungeons and Dragons 1st edition, and many people do. Many people are still playing 2nd. There's a lot of people that swear that 2nd edition is the best edition, right? I mean, I certainly enjoyed the hell out of 2nd edition, but you'll notice that one of the things, you see a lot of young players freaking out about the new version of D&D. It's going to be whatever, D&D 1 or whatever they decide to call it. Doesn't really matter to us old players because we're not going to play it, right? We're still, like, I've only have a little bit of experience with 5th edition, and frankly, I don't like it, right? I'm totally fine still playing 3rd edition, right? But the thing is that you don't have to adopt the newest version. Like, there was nothing wrong with the previous version. They're just adding new things and doing different things, and it doesn't make the newer version better necessarily, right? It's just different. 5th edition, I think, is actually a great edition for newer players, right? And it's worked, right? Has attracted a whole body of players. For me, I don't care for it. Like, it seems like D&D on kind of goofy, rigid, like oddly simplistic but rigid, like easy mode. It's not that interesting to me. But I get why people do it. But like for us, I don't get all worked up on whatever the new edition is going to be anymore because I don't care. Like, I'm not going to play it. It's unlikely that I'm going to adopt it. And I don't care if they change it because I can always play my version. When I DM, I tend to do Pathfinder, and I Frankenstein a lot of stuff in there, right? And so if there's something from the new edition or from 5th edition, like I like the advantage disadvantage, let's just do that. That's easy. And so it's a nice easy mechanic that you could just kind of rip off, right, and patch it into your own system. And so if they make something new and it's got a good rule, maybe we patch it in, or maybe we don't, right? But you'll notice that for older players that they like the old school, right, because they're never adopting the new version. And so they don't care if there is a new version or that they're going to have to spend more money. You don't have to do any of that, right, to play the game. You don't have, I mean, for a lot of us, like I bought a lot of 3rd edition books, and I still, and a lot of Pathfinder books, and that's about it. Like from that point on, from Pathfinder you know, I never bought. I bought a couple 4th edition books, and I have like the Player's Handbook for 5th edition, and that's it. So I have a minimal expenditure over the past like 10 years, right? And I've still been playing the hell out of the game, right, with the stuff I bought 15 years ago, right? I still have all the AD&D stuff, and like just tons of books, right? I like that's the most stuff that I have is 2nd edition, right? So, and I still bust it out. I'm like, how do I Frankenstein this into the game I'm running, right? So those are just some differences that I've noticed that I've been watching, and you see that the old school players just kind of they're into OSR and they bitch about all the stuff that the young players do, and a lot of the stuff that the young players do, they get, you know, mad. I mean, some people venture into the sort of political scene, uh, sort of unwisely, I guess. I don't know why you do it. I mean, just feel a need to bitch, but I like playing the game, and I'm sort of in that old school where I like watching stuff about the game, um, and sort of DM tips is what I really like as an older player. But a lot of these sort of optimization and what's popular in the community online, it's just not that interesting to me. But I think that's another thing, right? I'm the older player now, and so it's like a whole new generation. It is kind of amusing to see what the younger people kind of get into. But anyhow, firing out a video just to get back on track after like 5 months. So see you around. That's my video. Peace, and Johnny Walker says cheers.